The summer sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked asphalt of Miller's gas station, a lonely outpost on Route 47 where the desert met civilization. 8 members of the Iron Guardians Motorcycle Club had stopped to refuel, their chrome Harleys gleaming in the afternoon light. Marcus "Big Bear" Thompson wiped the sweat from his brow and adjusted his leather vest, the club's patch prominent on his back. These weren't the stereotypical outlaw bikers that movies portrayed. Most of them were veterans, fathers, and grandfathers who rode together every Saturday, their bond forged through shared service and a commitment to watch over their community. As Big Bear finished pumping gas, a sound pierced through the rumble of idling engines. It was a child's scream, raw and desperate, cutting through the desert air like a knife. The bikers' heads snapped toward the sound in unison, their military training kicking in instantly. From behind a cluster of parked cars, a little girl emerged, running at full speed. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old, her pink sneakers slapping against the pavement, her braids coming loose from their ties. Tears streamed down her face as she ran directly toward the group of imposing figures in leather. "Please help me," she cried out, her voice breaking with sobs. "They took my brother. Please, you have to help." The little girl reached Big Bear and grabbed onto his leg, her small hands clutching the worn leather of his riding pants. Her whole body shook with fear and exhaustion. The bikers immediately circled around her, their protective instincts engaging. Big Bear knelt down, making himself less intimidating despite his 6'4" frame and 300 pounds of solid muscle. "Slow down, sweetheart," he said gently, his voice a rumbling bass that somehow conveyed both strength and comfort. "Tell us what happened. Who took your brother?" The girl gulped air, trying to catch her breath between sobs. Her name was Aliyah, she managed to say, and she'd been playing with her 9-year-old brother David at the playground just a mile down the road. A white van had pulled up, and 2 men had grabbed David while Aliyah hid behind the slide. She'd seen them throw her brother into the van and speed away. "I ran and ran," Aliyah whimpered. "Mama's at work and I don't know where the police are and I saw you and I thought maybe you could help because you look strong and my daddy's in heaven and he used to ride a motorcycle and—" Her words tumbled out in a torrent of panic and hope. Big Bear felt his heart clench. The other bikers had already moved into action mode. Rita Viper Johnson, the club's vice president and a former army sergeant, was on her phone calling 911. Meanwhile, Tommy Wrench Martinez was pulling up security camera footage on his tablet, his tech skills a valuable asset the club often utilized. "Which way did they go?" asked Carlos Stone Rodriguez, his jaw tight with controlled fury. Aliyah pointed west, toward the industrial district where abandoned warehouses dotted the landscape. Big Bear made a decision in that moment, one that would change multiple lives forever. He looked at his brothers and sisters in the club, saw the same determination reflected in every face, and knew they were all thinking the same thing. The police would come, they would file reports, they would do their job. But minutes mattered in situations like this, and these 8 riders had the skills, the speed, and the motivation to act now. "Viper, you stay with Aliyah and coordinate with police," Big Bear commanded, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd led soldiers in combat. "The rest of you, we ride." "Wrench, did you get anything?" Wrench nodded grimly, his fingers flying across the screen. "White panel van, no plates visible, heading west 6 minutes ago. They've got maybe a 4-mile head start." Big Bear looked down at Aliyah, her tear-streaked face looking up at him with desperate hope. "You did good coming to us, baby girl," he told her. "We're going to find your brother. I promise you that." The 7 motorcycles roared to life with a thunder that shook the windows of Miller's gas station. Big Bear led the formation, his eyes scanning the road ahead with the focused intensity he'd learned in 2 tours of Afghanistan. Behind him rode 6 of his most trusted club members, each one ready to put everything on the line for a child they'd never met. This was what the Iron Guardians stood for, what they'd always stood for since the club's founding 15 years ago. They weren't just riders sharing a hobby. They were protectors, guardians of those who couldn't defend themselves. The desert highway stretched before them, heat waves shimmering off the asphalt. Big Bear's mind raced through possibilities as his hand steadily controlled his bike at 90 miles per hour. Child abduction cases haunted him, especially since his own daughter had been born. The statistics were grim, the first few hours absolutely critical. He pushed the throttle harder, knowing that every second counted. Behind him, the formation stayed tight, moving as one unit through traffic like a spearhead. Wrench's voice crackled through their helmet communicators, a system he'd rigged up last year for exactly these kinds of emergency situations. "Big Bear, I've got eyes on traffic cameras." White van spotted 3 miles ahead, taking the turn off toward the Riverside Industrial Complex. That made terrible sense. The complex had been mostly abandoned for 5 years, since the textile factory closed and took most of the area's jobs with it. Miles of empty buildings, no witnesses, no security. It was exactly where someone would take an abducted child. All units, we've got a location. Big Bear's voice came through clear and commanding. Remember the rules. We locate, we observe, we coordinate with law enforcement. Nobody plays hero and gets hurt. These kids need us smart, not reckless. But even as he said it, Big Bear knew that if they saw that child in immediate danger, rules would go out the window. They all knew it. You didn't watch a child suffer when you had the power to stop it. The industrial complex appeared on the horizon, a sprawl of rusting metal and broken windows. The bikers split up as they trained to do, surrounding the perimeter in a coordinated sweep. Snake and Hammer took the north entrance, Tiny and Diesel covered the south, while Reaper watched the main road. Big Bear and Wrench approached from the east, cutting their engines 2 blocks out to move in quietly. The sudden silence after the constant roar of engines felt unnatural, oppressive. Big Bear dismounted and gestured for Wrench to follow. They moved between buildings with practiced stealth, their boots making barely a whisper on the cracked pavement. Years of military training came flooding back, muscle memory taking over. Clear a corner, check your 6, move with purpose. Then they heard it, a child's muffled crying coming from a warehouse with faded letters reading Riverside Textiles Manufacturing. Through a grimy window, Big Bear caught sight of the white van parked inside. His blood ran cold when he saw 2 men near the vehicle, and there, sitting on the floor with his hands bound, was a young boy matching David's description. The child's face was streaked with tears, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. One of the men was on a phone, his voice carrying through the thin walls. "Yeah, we got the package. Same price as usual. Someone will pick him up by nightfall." The words hit Big Bear like a physical blow. This wasn't a random abduction. This was human trafficking, an organized operation. The boy wasn't just in danger, he was merchandised to these monsters. Big Bear felt a rage building inside him that he hadn't experienced since combat, a primal fury at the absolute evil of what he was witnessing. He forced himself to breathe, to think tactically. Wrench was already photographing everything through the window, documenting evidence while simultaneously streaming it to Viper's phone. "Police are 15 minutes out," Wrench whispered, checking his phone. "Viper says they are bringing a tactical unit." 15 minutes. Big Bear looked at the boy again, saw the terror in his eyes, the way he flinched every time one of the men moved near him. 15 minutes was an eternity. 15 minutes was too long. The man on the phone hung up and turned to his partner. "We need to move him to the secondary location. Too much heat on this area lately." That changed everything. If they moved David, finding him again might be impossible. The boy could disappear into a network that spanned states, countries. Big Bear made his decision. He clicked his communicator twice, the signal the club used for all units converge, situation critical. Within 60 seconds, all 7 bikers had silently assembled outside the warehouse. Big Bear quickly outlined what they'd seen, what they'd heard. The looks on his brothers' faces told him everything he needed to know about how they felt about waiting. "Here's what we're doing," Big Bear said quietly. "Wrench, you're on the van. Disable it, make it silent. Snake, Hammer, you're with me on primary entry. Tiny and Diesel, secondary entrance. Reaper, you watch our backs and the outside perimeter. We go in fast, we secure the child, we hold these guys until police arrive." "Understood." 7 heads nodded in unison. The warehouse door had seen better days, its lock rusted and weak. Big Bear tested it carefully, finding it unlocked, a detail that spoke to the kidnappers' arrogance. They thought they were safe here, thought no one would find them, thought they could operate with impunity. That was about to change dramatically. Big Bear held up 3 fingers, counting down silently. 3, 2, 1. The Iron Guardians moved as a single unit, years of coordination making them fluid and precise. The door swung open and Big Bear stepped through, his imposing figure filling the doorway. The 2 men near the van spun around, shock registering on their faces. The taller one, a wiry man with a neck tattoo, reached for something in his waistband. "I wouldn't." Big Bear's voice was quiet but carried absolute authority. Behind him, 6 more bikers filed in, fanning out to surround the area. The men were outnumbered and outmatched, and they knew it immediately. "Who the hell are you?" the second man snarled, trying to project confidence he clearly didn't feel. He was shorter, stockier, with the kind of mean eyes that suggested he enjoyed causing pain. His hand hovered near his pocket, calculating odds. Snake moved with surprising speed for a man his size, closing the distance and pinning the stocky man's arm before he could reach whatever weapon he was going for. The sound of the man hitting the concrete floor echoed through the warehouse. "We're the people who are going to make sure you never hurt another child," Big Bear said, his voice like gravel. He moved toward David, who looked up at the massive biker with a mixture of fear and hope. "Hey there, David. Your sister Aliyah sent us to find you. She's safe, and you're going to be safe too, okay?" The boy's eyes widened at his sister's name, and fresh tears spilled down his cheeks, these ones born of relief rather than terror. Hammer, a former Marine with gentle hands despite his intimidating appearance, carefully cut the zip ties binding David's wrists. The boy immediately curled into himself, his body shaking. Hammer wrapped his leather jacket around the child's shoulders, a gesture of protection and warmth. "You're safe now, son. We've got you. Nobody's going to hurt you." David clutched the jacket and nodded, unable to speak through his tears. The wiry man made a sudden move toward the van, perhaps hoping to escape or grab a weapon stored inside. Diesel intercepted him effortlessly, spinning him around and forcing him to the ground with controlled precision. "Stay down," Diesel commanded, his knee pressed firmly against the man's back. "You move again, and I won't be nearly as nice." The threat was clear and effective. The man went limp, realizing his situation was hopeless. Wrench had been busy during the confrontation, his phone recording everything for evidence. He'd also been in constant contact with Viper and the responding police units. "Cops are 3 minutes out," he announced. "Viper says they've got CPS on standby, and she's bringing Aliyah to the station where they can reunite the kids safely." Big Bear nodded, relieved that the authorities were close. They'd done what they needed to do, but now it was time to let the system take over. The wiry man's phone buzzed on the floor where it had fallen during the scuffle. Big Bear picked it up carefully, using his bandana to avoid leaving prints. The screen showed an incoming call from a number with no name attached. This was bigger than just 2 men in a van. This was an organization, a network. The phone stopped ringing, then immediately a text message appeared. "Status? Buyer waiting." The casual cruelty of that message, referring to a child as a commodity, made Big Bear's stomach turn. "You're all going to prison," the stocky man spat from his position on the floor, Snake's weight still pinning him down. "You think you're heroes? You just assaulted us, broke into private property. You got nothing." His attempt at bravado fell flat, especially when he saw the cold smile that crossed Big Bear's face. "Actually, we have everything," Big Bear replied. "We have video of you with an abducted child. We have your text messages discussing selling him. We have testimony from witnesses. And we have something else you don't have, we're on the right side of this." The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Reaper's voice came through the communicators, multiple units approaching from the main road. "Looks like they brought everyone." The warehouse suddenly felt smaller as the weight of what they'd done settled over the group. They'd found the boy, they'd stopped the kidnappers, but they'd also taken the law into their own hands. There would be questions, statements, possibly charges for their actions. David looked up at Big Bear with eyes that had seen too much for his young age. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I was so scared." Big Bear knelt down beside the boy, his massive hand gentle on David's shoulder. "You were brave, David. You survived. That takes real strength. Your sister was brave too, running to find help. You come from strong stock, kid." The first police cars screeched to a halt outside the warehouse, their red and blue lights painting the interior walls in alternating colors. Officers poured in, weapons drawn, shouting commands. Big Bear and his club members slowly raised their hands, showing they were compliant and unarmed. The lead officer, a sergeant with gray hair and sharp eyes, quickly assessed the situation. 7 bikers standing calmly with raised hands, 2 men restrained on the ground, and a frightened child wrapped in a leather jacket. Sergeant Mike Brennan had been with the force for 26 years, and he prided himself on reading situations quickly. What he saw in the Riverside warehouse didn't fit any standard template. The bikers weren't fighting, weren't fleeing, weren't threatening. They stood with military bearing, hands visible, clearly waiting for law enforcement to take control. The 2 men on the ground looked like exactly what they were, caught predators. And the child, that was the key to understanding everything. "Someone want to tell me what's going on here?" Brennan asked, his weapon still drawn but pointed safely toward the ground. Big Bear stepped forward slowly, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Sergeant, my name is Marcus Thompson. About 20 minutes ago, a 7-year-old girl named Aliyah came running to our motorcycle club at Miller's gas station, crying that 2 men had abducted her brother David from the playground. We called it into 911 and then pursued to keep eyes on the situation. We found the boy here with these 2 men, who were discussing selling him to a buyer. Brennan's eyes flickered to David, taking in the child's bound wrists that had only recently been cut free, the tears, the obvious signs of trauma. He looked back at the 2 men on the ground, saw the guilt written clearly on their faces. His jaw tightened. "Officer Martinez, secure those 2 suspects," he commanded. "Read them their rights. And get that child a medic, now." As officers moved to comply, Brennan holstered his weapon and approached Big Bear. "You understand you've put me in a difficult position," Brennan said quietly, so only the bikers could hear. "You pursued suspects, entered a building, and physically restrained individuals. That's vigilante justice, no matter how noble the intentions." Big Bear nodded, accepting the assessment. "I understand, Sergeant. But that boy was about to be moved to a secondary location. If we'd waited, he might have disappeared forever. I made a command decision based on the information available and the time constraints. I'll accept whatever consequences come from that decision." A younger officer approached Brennan, holding the cell phone Wrench had been using to document everything. "Sergeant, you need to see this. They recorded the whole thing. The suspects discussing the sale, the text messages about buyers, everything. This is a solid case." Brennan watched the footage, his expression growing darker with each passing second. When he finished, he handed the phone back and looked at the Iron Guardians with new respect. "You boys did good work today," he said finally. "Stupid, reckless, potentially illegal work, but good nonetheless. That recording might be the difference between putting these guys away for a few years versus putting away their entire network." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Officially, I need all of you to come to the station and give statements. Unofficially, I'm the father of 3 kids, and if someone had grabbed one of mine, I'd hope someone like you would be there." An ambulance arrived, and paramedics rushed to check on David. The boy refused to let go of Hammer's jacket, clutching it like a security blanket. Hammer knelt beside him, speaking in low, reassuring tones until David finally agreed to be examined. The lead paramedic, a woman with kind eyes and graying hair, worked efficiently but gently, checking David for injuries while explaining everything she was doing. Detective Sarah Chen arrived shortly after, her sedan pulling up with considerably less drama than the patrol cars. She was the department's specialist in human trafficking cases, and her reputation was formidable. Chen walked straight to the 2 suspects, now handcuffed and seated on the warehouse floor, and studied them with cold professional assessment. Then she turned to the cell phone that had been ringing earlier, scrolling through messages that painted a damning picture of an organized operation. "This is bigger than I thought," Chen said, pulling Brennan aside. Their conversation was quiet but intense, with occasional glances toward the bikers and the suspects. After several minutes, Chen approached Big Bear directly. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Detective Chen. I specialize in trafficking cases, specifically those involving children. The evidence you've gathered here today is going to help us break open a ring we've been investigating for 8 months. Those text messages contain phone numbers we've been trying to track, and now we have probable cause for warrants." Big Bear felt a wave of relief wash over him. They hadn't just saved David, they'd potentially saved dozens of other children. "Detective, I need to know that David and his sister will be protected. If this is a network, they might face retaliation." Chen nodded grimly. "Already on it. We're placing the family in protective services until we can neutralize the threat. The mother is being brought in now, and we're arranging temporary housing in a secure location." Viper's voice crackled through Big Bear's communicator, which he'd forgotten he was still wearing. "Boss, Aliyah is asking about her brother. She's frantic. Can we give her any news?" Big Bear looked at Sergeant Brennan, who nodded his permission. "Tell her David is safe, he's being checked by doctors, and she'll see him very soon. Tell her she did exactly the right thing, and she saved her brother's life today." As David was being loaded into the ambulance for transport to the hospital, he suddenly called out, "Wait." The paramedics paused, and the boy looked directly at Big Bear and the other bikers. "I don't know if anyone told you thank you properly," David said, his voice stronger now despite his tears. "So thank you. All of you. You saved my life." The hardened bikers, veterans who'd seen combat and tragedy, felt their eyes sting with emotion. "You take care of yourself, David," Big Bear replied, his voice thick. "You and your sister, you look out for each other. And remember, heroes can come in all shapes and sizes. Your sister is the real hero today. She ran to find help when she could have frozen in fear. That's courage. David nodded, managing a small smile before the ambulance doors closed and the vehicle pulled away toward the hospital, lights flashing but siren silent. The warehouse was now a crime scene, with evidence technicians photographing everything and cataloging items. The two suspects were being transported in separate vehicles, their heads down, their futures suddenly very bleak. The police station was bustling with activity as the Iron Guardians filed in to give their statements. News of the rescue had spread quickly through the department, and officers kept pausing to nod respectfully at the bikers as they passed. It wasn't every day that civilians successfully intervened in a child abduction case, and the fact that they'd done so without anyone getting hurt was nothing short of remarkable. Big Bear and his club sat in a conference room, each member waiting their turn to be interviewed by detectives. Through the window, Big Bear caught sight of a woman being escorted down the hallway. She was slight, wearing a grocery store uniform, her face etched with worry and exhaustion. This had to be David and Aaliyah's mother, Terrence Washington. She moved quickly, almost running, guided by a female officer toward a room at the end of the hall. Moments later, a door opened and a small figure shot out like a rocket. Aaliyah's cry of "Mama" echoed through the station, and mother and daughter collided in an embrace that made everyone who witnessed it pause in their work. Within seconds, David appeared from the medical examination room, still wrapped in Hammer's leather jacket despite the hospital blanket draped over his shoulders. The family reunion that followed was raw and beautiful, all three of them crying and holding each other as if they'd never let go again. Terrence kept kissing her children's foreheads, checking them over, unable to believe they were really safe. "My babies," she kept repeating. "My precious babies." Detective Chen let them have their moment before gently guiding the family to a private room. But before the door closed, Terrence looked back and locked eyes with Big Bear through the conference room window. She mouthed two words, "Thank you." Then she was gone, ushering her children into safety and privacy. Big Bear nodded, feeling a weight lift from his chest that he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. The interviews took hours. Each biker recounted the events from their perspective, providing details that helped investigators build their case. Wrench turned over all his digital evidence, the video footage and photos that documented everything. The detectives were thorough but fair, recognizing that while the bikers' actions existed in a legal gray area, their intentions had been pure and their results undeniable. By late evening, all the statements had been taken and the club members were finally free to leave. As they walked out of the station into the cool night air, they were met with an unexpected sight. News vans lined the street, cameras pointed at the station entrance, reporters jostling for position. The story had broken, social media had exploded with details, and the Iron Guardians had become instant news. "There they are," a reporter shouted, and suddenly microphones were being thrust toward their faces, questions coming from all directions. "Mr. Thompson, how did you know where to find the boy? Is it true you're all veterans? What message do you have for other motorcycle clubs?" Big Bear held up his hand, and the crowd quieted slightly. He wasn't comfortable with this attention, none of them were, but he understood that what they said now mattered. "We did what any decent person would do when a child asked for help," he said simply. "The real hero is 7-year-old Aaliyah Washington, who had the courage to seek help when she was terrified. And the other hero is her mother, working hard every day to provide for her family. We just happened to be in the right place at the right time." "Will you face charges?" another reporter called out. Big Bear glanced back at the station, where Sergeant Brennan stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold. "That's up to the authorities to decide," Big Bear replied. "We'll accept whatever comes. But I'll tell you this, I'd make the same decision again in a heartbeat. Some things are more important than following every letter of every law, and protecting children is at the top of that list." The press conference, impromptu as it was, continued for another 20 minutes. Rita Viper Johnson spoke eloquently about the responsibility everyone has to protect the vulnerable. Wrench explained how technology and old-fashioned courage had combined to save a life. By the time the bikers finally mounted their motorcycles to head home, Iron Guardians was trending worldwide on social media, the story resonating with millions who were hungry for good news in a dark world. Days turned into weeks, and the aftermath of that Saturday afternoon continued to unfold. The two men arrested at the warehouse pleaded guilty as part of a deal to provide information about their trafficking network. Their testimony led to 17 additional arrests across 4 states, dismantling an organization that had been operating for over a decade. Dozens of children were identified as victims and reunited with families who'd given up hope of ever seeing them again. The district attorney reviewed the Iron Guardians' actions and ultimately decided not to file charges, determining that their intervention fell under citizens' arrest statutes and that any technical violations were outweighed by the public good. The decision was controversial in some legal circles but widely celebrated by the public. The mayor held a ceremony at City Hall, presenting Big Bear and his club with commendations for heroism and community service. But the moment that mattered most to the bikers came on a sunny afternoon 3 months after the rescue. The Iron Guardians were having their regular Saturday ride, rolling through town in formation, when they stopped at a traffic light. A car pulled up beside them, and Terrence Washington rolled down her window. In the back seat, David and Aaliyah waved enthusiastically, both children grinning from ear to ear. "Thank you," Terrence called out again, her voice carrying over the rumble of engines. "Thank you for giving me my children back." The family had been relocated to a safer neighborhood, and Terrence had been promoted at work after her story became known. David was in counseling but doing well, his resilience a testament to his inner strength. And Aaliyah had become something of a local hero herself, invited to speak at schools about courage and trusting your instincts. The little girl who'd run to strangers for help had shown an entire community what bravery looked like. As the light turned green and the bikers prepared to ride on, Big Bear glanced back one more time. Aaliyah was holding up a drawing she'd made, visible through the rear window. It showed 8 figures on motorcycles, rendered in crayon with childish but heartfelt detail. Above the drawing, in careful letters, she'd written, "My Angels." Big Bear felt his throat tighten with emotion as he accelerated, the wind catching the moisture in his eyes. The Iron Guardians continued their ride through town, 8 motorcycles moving in perfect formation, chrome gleaming in the afternoon sun. They passed families in parks, kids playing on sidewalks, elderly couples walking hand in hand. This was what they rode for, what they'd always ridden for, to be guardians of their community, protectors of the innocent, and proof that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear leather vests, ride Harleys, and show up exactly when they're needed most. The story of what happened that day spread far beyond their small town. Other motorcycle clubs reached out, inspired to form their own community protection programs. The Iron Guardians became mentors, teaching others how to coordinate with law enforcement, how to respond to emergencies, how to be a force for good in their communities. What started with one little girl's desperate cry for help had sparked a movement. Years later, people would still talk about that Saturday afternoon when 8 bikers became heroes. But if you asked any member of the Iron Guardians about it, they'd tell you the same thing. They weren't heroes, they were just people who refused to look away when someone needed help. And really, that's all heroism has ever been. Ordinary people making extraordinary choices in moments that matter. The rest, as they say, is just noise and legend. What matters is that David and Aaliyah are safe, growing up in a world that showed them compassion exists, that strangers can be angels, and that sometimes, when you run toward the thunder of engines, you find salvation waiting on the other side.